I've got 4 stats that are really going to help all of us in fantasy drafts this year. And I'm avoiding common knowledge with this. I don't want to share stuff that you're probably already aware of. I did research, going a little deeper cut, sharing stats that I have hardly heard discussed or haven't heard discussed at all so far this offseason. Because that's going to help us all just get a better pulse on a large pool of players. My first stat is starting off in Philadelphia. From weeks 10 through 17, DeVonta Smith out-targeted A.J. Brown in 75% of games and outscored him by 1.2 points per game over this stretch. This isn't negative A.J. Brown talk. That's not what this is. Okay? I love A.J. Brown. I think he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. What it is, though, is definite pro DeVonta Smith chatter here on the channel because DeVonta Smith is fantastic. He's phenomenal. He was a near flawless prospect coming out of college. His rookie year got overshadowed by historic production from Jalen Waddle and Jamar Chase. But he goes out in year 2 and really breaks out, especially again in the second half of the season when he's averaging 18.1 points per game, one of the best receivers in fantasy. I don't think people realize, but this is very much like a 1A, 1B tandem between A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith because both are 2 of the best receivers in the league. I already think DeVonta Smith's a top 15 guy at his position. Call me crazy, but he outproduced A.J. Brown for half the year. He checks off, again, pretty much every box. I love him. So straight up, I still do prefer A.J. Brown. I have him a couple spots higher in my wide receiver rankings, but why take A.J. Brown when I can get DeVonta Smith over a round later? Again, I think they're going to be very similar in production this year. So from a value standpoint, it just doesn't make sense to get A.J. Brown. On the flip side, I like myself some round 3 DeVonta Smith. Next up, we got some stats for the low-volume passing teams of the NFL. When the DeAndre Hopkins signing happened, I was doing some research for Treylon Burks because he was one of my favorite players. I thought he was going to break out this year. So now I was like, okay, with DeAndre Hopkins in the equation, Burks as the number 2 receiver in this low-volume Titans passing offense that hasn't cracked 32 pass attempts per game since like 2015, what are the odds Burks actually breaks out? I found that last year there were 12 teams that threw under 32 pass attempts per game. Only 2 of those teams, the Eagles and the 49ers, supported multiple 12-plus point per game receivers. Back in 2021, the year before last year, there were 10 teams under 32 pass attempts per game. And again, only 2 of those teams, the 49ers and the Seahawks, supported multiple 12-plus point per game receivers. So this is just important to keep in mind when you're discussing these low-volume teams and you're looking at their receiving options and their number 2 guys, because typically the upside is going to be capped unless it's a great combination of just pure elite receivers, which is important because you need guys that could demand a 25+% target share when their teams are only throwing 30 times per game. So they need to be able to demand enough volume in the scarce opportunity. And then generally these offenses need to score a lot and be efficient, which is usually a source of good quarterback play. Because like the Eagles and the 49ers last year were still well above league average in scoring and pass yards per game, despite not throwing it a whole lot. This year, Mike Clay is projecting 8 teams to be under 32 pass attempts per game. The Bears, the Colts, the Falcons, the Browns, the Ravens, the Titans, the 49ers, and the Eagles. So again, the 49ers and the Eagles should have no problem supporting multiple guys again in 2023. But keep those other 6 in mind. I do think the Browns and the Ravens, Mike Clay might be wrong on those 2. I think they could crack the 32 pass attempt per game threshold. But regardless, they're on here. And I threw in 4 more teams that Mike Clay projected to be over 32 pass attempts per game. But I think they're going to be hovering right around the 32 mark and could easily fall under it. The Commanders, the Packers, the Texans, and the Panthers. So keep these teams in mind, again, because very few of them are actually going to support multiple 12-plus point per game receivers. And unless they have that elite combination of ingredients that I talked about earlier, they might just be worth crossing off your draft board, honestly, at that point. And it really will help you narrow down your player pool on draft day. Let's talk about the Prince of Duval, Trevor Lawrence. From weeks 9 through 17 last year, he averaged 20.5 points per game, nearly 260 passing yards per game. It was top 5 in an abundance of quarterback metrics. Very, very strong second half of the season for Trevor Lawrence. Led the Jaguars to the playoffs. It was great to see. But why I love this so much is because Lawrence is going as the QB8. He's like the last quarterback you could draft that has actual like QB1 upside. And what I love so much about this week 9 through 17 stretch, because a lot of people are going to be like, what the hell? Like, this is just cherry-picked second half of the season. But no. His rookie year was abysmal, but he was placed in a terrible situation. Then he gets a whole new regime. Doug Peterson's his new head coach, a brand new shuffled deck of receivers. And through weeks 1 through 8, he was better than his rookie season, but he was still inconsistent. Then in the second half of last year, he really started to find his footing. He showed so much growth, and it led to more fantasy production. And now this upcoming year, he's absolutely going to take at least a step forward, if not multiple steps forward, for 3 reasons. 1, year 3 is a common breakout season for quarterbacks. 2, this is his second season with the Doug Peterson regime. And 3, they added Calvin Ridley, who's going to be his new wide receiver 1, so it's an improved receiving core. So Lawrence showed us the new Trevor Lawrence that we saw in the second half of the season. He has a 20-point per game floor, and because of these 3 things that suggest he's going to take multiple steps forward, he has an attainable top 3 quarterback ceiling this year. So Trevor Lawrence going as the QB8 is a value. He's a target for me. And I love the growth he showed last year, and there's multiple reasons to believe he's going to build upon that in 2023. I'm going to go ahead and dip into the running back pool now, finally, right? And talk some Cam Akers, who averaged 17.7 points per game from weeks 13 through 18. And I know you're probably sitting there being like, Aiden, these are all just end of the season stats you keep pointing to. Well, I figured that would be the theme of today's episode. I promise if I do more of these in the future, it won't just be that. But I also think when we take context into consideration, these actually hold a lot of weight. And that's no different with Cam Akers than it was for DeVonta Smith or Trevor Lawrence, all these guys that I talked about earlier. Now, at the beginning of the season, weeks 1 through 12, Akers was really bad. Really, really bad. He was hardly playing. When he was playing, he was inefficient. It was really ugly. But remember, he was fresh off an Achilles tear. It was exactly why I drafted 0 Akers last season personally. These guys fresh off an Achilles tear typically do not produce. And Akers clearly was not himself. Yet in weeks 13 through 18, end of the season, he starts to come back into his own again. He's recovering from that Achilles tear. He's starting to trust his body again, get that explosiveness back. And we saw him start to handle a workhorse volume again. It led to nearly 18 points per game over the last month and a half of the season, including 4 straight 100-plus yard games to end the year. And to me, again, because he was coming back from the Achilles tear for the first 12 weeks, and then he was back to nearly 100% to end the season, those end of the season numbers are far more indicative of what he's going to be in 2023 than what he did at the beginning of the season. Especially considering the Rams added no one to this backfield. All they did was add Zach Evans in the 6th round of the draft. That's it. And it's the final year of Akers' contract, so they might just run him into the ground, give him as much volume as he can handle before they reshuffle the deck in 2024. But he's going as the RB21 right now, which tells me people are holding a little too much weight into what he did fresh off the Achilles tear and not enough into what he did at the end of last season, which is who he's going to be in 2023. Not saying he's going to average 17.7 points per game necessarily extrapolated over an entire season, but he is going to take on workhorse volume, be productive, and be a value right now, considering he's going as the RB21 in underdog drafts. That's going to do for today's video. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I've done video content for years now, but this is my first video on this new channel, so I'd really appreciate any of the support I can get to really get the ball rolling on this thing. I'm very excited. And I know the camera wasn't working today. This is just audio with clip-ups over it, but I promise I'll get that going again soon so you can all see my beautiful face. But again, that's going to do for today's video. My name's Aiden Mayer. I'll see you guys next time.